Welcome. This is a recorded session of the Post-Quantum Cryptography Conference of the PKI Consortium, which took place in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This conference is made possible through the support of the PKI Consortium Post-Quantum Cryptography Working Group and our sponsors SSL.com, Entrust, Keyfactor, HID, and Crypto4A. And with exceptional organizational support from SSL.com, Keyfactor, Logius, POS Digicert, Baker Tilly, MSC Trustgate, and Digitoris. Join the discussion. Join the PKI Consortium. Go to pkic.org/join.
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. I'm Samantha Mabey. I'm Product Marketing Director of Cryptographic Security Solutions at Entrust, and I'm pleased to be your host for the remainder of the morning here. Thank you so much for having me to the PKI Consortium. We've come a long way in the other side of the world from the very first one that I attended in Ottawa, Canada, and it's great to see they're bringing this to the global conversation. So for our first session this after the break, it's PQC across verticals, what we've learned, where we're headed, and our moderator really needs no introduction. He's already been on stage, but Paul Brand-Bauershaven, gracious host and chair of the PKI Consortium. So I'll hand it over to you to introduce the panel and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Samantha. So this is great because we're going to talk about the roundtable discussions, and actually I would like to learn a lot about them because I didn't have the privilege to actually attend them while we were preparing for the conference. But first, let me introduce the panel. So Jamie Gomez, you're the global head of the Santander Quantum Threat Program, if I said it correctly, and the chair of the Europol Quantum Safe Financial Forum.
That's right.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. I always know that your talks are very inspiring. You're very active on LinkedIn, so if you're not following Jamie yet, please look him up because he's one of your news sources that you want to follow. Laurie Thorpe, Quantum Safe Industries lead at IBM. Thank you here. It's not the first time also for you to be at the Post-Quantum Cryptography Conference. So it's great having you here. Welcome. And Scott Rea, you are the Director and Global Strategic. Okay, that's going to be interesting. Okay, so, apparently people cannot hear me on the live stream when I'm not talking in this mic. So let's see if this goes better. Scott Rea, you're with me, Mudra. I think you're now the Senior Vice President. Sorry? EVP, the Executive Vice President. Well, congratulations with the promotion and welcome being here on stage. You've been talking and leading the Healthcare Roundtable. So also for that, very interested to see what we're going to see there. And then we have Zygmunt Lozinski. Do I pronounce that right? Zig. Okay. Well, that is a lot easier for me. Also from IBM and a senior technical staff member and quantum ambassador at IBM Research. So yeah, thank you all for joining. We have about 25 minutes, so it's very short. So we're going to start quickly. And first, what I thought is maybe interesting, and try to sum it up in like a couple of words, and just very short. How did you experience yourself the roundtables that we had yesterday?
I think, well, what I saw in the session in the morning, and especially in the one that we had in the afternoon, lot of audience. So congratulations for the organization of the PQC conference, because we're 2,500, no? So
2,500, yeah.
That's a lot of people, and also very interactive, and so it's encouraging to see that people are here, coming not just to listen, but also to share ideas, to discuss, and that's the way you learn and you change your mind, no?
Okay, thank you. And Laurie, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, it was the session that we had on telco. I was worried because I wasn't quite sure who was going to turn up and whether we would be able to get a good conversation going. It was very, very interactive. I think it was small enough for people to to be sort of willing to share their experience, ask questions. So really, really great. We had a great conversation. There were some interesting takeaways. So I think overall, very positive experiment, and really happy with the session.
Okay, sounds good. Scott?
Yeah, look, first of all, I want to say a big thank you to the panelists who came, because we had a session in healthcare and we tried to get a perspective from across the globe, and we targeted different regions to make sure that we could get that perspective. Folks traveled a long way. Our panelists were very dynamic, and the actual interaction in the room itself, oftentimes, we had a little bit of a script of things that we wanted to take in terms of a discussion, but a lot of content was actually generated from the folks who were participating in the room itself. So it was a very rich discussion, and we probably got through 10% of what we had planned to talk about. And we did deviate a little bit, but I think it was very insightful and very valuable to get a good perspective, because the 4 panelists that we literally came from the 4 corners of the world. So that was nice to see.
Okay, that sounds very good. Zeke?
Well, we had there's a lot of interest around the world in what's happening in different countries around regulation and around incentives. And it was a heart-stopping moment when there was no tech when I got into the room, but hey. But the thing that I thought was really interesting is that there were a lot of questions to try and figure out, why is this country taking that approach? Does it work? Does it not work? What are the best ways? And this discussion is going to come up again and again. Do we want regulation versus do we want incentives? How do you encourage this transition to PQC? And I think that's going to be an overwhelming theme.
Okay, well, very interesting. And it's also what I heard from, we had a network dinner for all the speakers and organizers yesterday. And they were also very positive, the ones that participated in these roundtables, actually about the outcomes. So yeah, let's see how we can, what we can do with that in the future. And if we indeed can continue such a discussion, as you said, Scott, maybe the time is not long enough.
Sorry, Paul, I just want to make one of the things that came out of our roundtable was perhaps a suggestion that if we're going to continue this theme of industry-based roundtables in future, maybe we should have like a mailing list that people could mail questions into, so that by the time we hit our next conference 12 months from now, we've already got the content that we want to discuss already decided.
Sounds very good. Yeah, let's do that. With that, Jamie, what's the #1 financial service? So if we're looking at financial services, there are plenty. Yeah, there's so many. I think you have a very challenging migration ahead of you. What is the #1 you say? Okay, that's what we really need to prioritize for migration, and how they are deciding on that based on which risks to tackle first?
So you're asking me to spoil part of my later talk, but I think there's, and this is something we discussed yesterday. So there, obviously there is one factor that you need to consider, which is the criticality of your use cases. And so you probably do not need to consider things that are not a real, a very strong risk. But once you have identified your use cases where you're going to be facing future risks, there's 2 ideas that you need to focus on. One is how autonomous you are to take an action today. So can you do something now? And maybe there's some low-hanging fruit that you can go solving, no? And the second thing is how dependent you are on others. And how is that dependency create a very complex project for you? So I was trying not to, but I will spoil part of my conference. You take, for instance, confidentiality protection on transactional websites. Can you do something about it today? Yes. We are all using post-quantum cryptography when we browse an internet website today. So the solutions are there. Do you have very complex dependencies? Well, the web browsers would be the most complex dependency, but the most important of them, with an exception of Safari, support PQC already today, and they have been supporting it for 1 year.
Yeah, it's about 50% of the total internet traffic according to Cloudflare, I think.
I've just read a LinkedIn post from Bas Westervan.
Yes.
Hey, Bas, saying that 50% of human-generated internet traffic, web traffic, passing through Cloudflare is PQC protected already.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So this shows that this is a reality today and not something that we're talking here about some uncertain future.
Yeah.
And there's another kind of use cases where you're gonna see, well, I cannot do something today, but my transition is gonna depend on very complex hardware replacements that with, for instance, credit cards. Everybody's got a credit card. There's trillions of credit cards. There's billions of card processing devices out there. If you want to transition that, you need to plan long ahead, because you want to do that coordinated with the deprecation timelines of the hardware.
And I think the financial industry also learned a lot about prior transitions. Like I remember SHA-1 was really a big issue for the payment industry to transition all the payment terminals that were out there in the field, and they couldn't handle the new algorithms, the hashing algorithms at the time, which caused some exceptions to deal with those scenarios. Well, very interesting. So just moving to Scott first. So Scott, medical environments. You see more and more medical IoT. People are wearing devices on their body, maybe have implants and things like that. Those devices are very constrained, and that might be one of the biggest risks. I don't know. There's so many risks in healthcare. Technology is like, healthcare seems to be a very human thing, but technology seems to be so deeply rooted in there as well. What do you expect to be the biggest risk for healthcare?
So I'm actually, in the discussion that we had, we talked about, we had a very diverse set of stakeholders in the room. We had device manufacturers in the room, and I had a set of slides up at one point saying, hey, we got a plan for devices that might need to be out in the wild for like 25 years, and somebody over here said 25 years, it's more like 40 in healthcare. And we had one device manufacturer in the room who said, we've got devices that have been there for 60 years. So, how are you going to manage that? Well, I think the biggest risk in healthcare actually is not so much the technology at this point. This is what came out of the discussion. Yes, we're going to have to deal with that. Yes, we're going to have to deal with devices that are long-lived and maybe have very limited capabilities and how they're going to be cycled. Perhaps the answer there is to focus on the interfaces that they have to data repositories, etc. But the biggest risk that kind of came out of our discussion yesterday was that of strategic buy-in. And that if you're trying to approach a PQC migration as a project, you're already off on the wrong foot. It's not a project with a start and an end date. It needs to be approached as more of a program. It's something that you're starting that is going to have to continue in perpetuity, because we're not just talking about, crypto agility and migrating this first set of PQC algorithms. There's many more in the hopper that we're going to have to deal with over time, and having strategic buy-in from stakeholders who understand that this is not a one and done, or not a program or a project that you're going to run. You actually have to have something that is built for the long term.
Yeah, you actually have to integrate it in your daily operations, in your supply chain management and everything related to that. So very good point, very interesting. So Laurie, going back to you, CBOM, the cryptographic bill of materials. I know something you and IBM are working on a lot, and specifically in the telecom sector, where you also have a lot of IoT and 5G networks. What would be the toughest challenge, the technical challenge for the PQC transition for the telecom sector?
I think, building on what Jaime was saying, it's managing the dependencies and understanding where things are and what you can control directly and what you can't control directly. What we've seen as we've started peeling the onion, as it were, so starting to look at use cases and starting to understand what's in, from the use case, breaking it down into the various solutions, into the various components, into the products, into the hardware, into the software. And you start to peel this back and you realize that basically every time you look at it, there's a next layer of complexity that emerges. And what we've started doing in the context of the GSMA work that I chair, we've started looking at CBOM as a way of, first of all, helping with the communication. So helping for operators to speak to vendors, helping to communicate the cryptography information that today is fragmented. So there isn't necessarily a single way of communicating it. There isn't a single way of requesting it. There isn't a single way of understanding compliance, of doing a comparison, so of normalizing. And we've had very good traction with that because from the vendor side, as a vendor, if you've got hundreds of clients, the last thing you want is for each of those clients to be asking for a slightly different version of the information that you need to provide. As an operator, again, the last thing you need is for each of your vendors to come with a slightly weird and wonderful way of communicating cryptography, and then you're left with a whole bunch of data that you need to try and make sense of. So that is why one of the first things that we've started doing in the context of CBOM for telco is we started looking at what this means for procurement. And I think, again, building on Scott's point around, how do you manage this as a program? One of the first things that I think every enterprise should be looking at is, how do I start managing the supply chain? So how do I start communicating what I want, when I want it, how I want it? And it will be a dialogue, but I think CBOM is one of the enablers of this dialogue that will ultimately help to make everybody's lives a little bit easier.
Yeah, so to very quickly follow up. I've heard a lot of people saying like CBOM is great, SBOM is great, we all should have it. But then in practice, I also hear a lot of people actually pushing back. We do not want to disclose this information because it tells us too much about our solutions and might threaten or position in the market. What do you think about that? Will that be a challenge going forward? And really short, please.
I think it will be a challenge, but I think that is part of it's part of the work that needs to be done around understanding what is the right level of information. And in these cases, I don't think that more is necessarily better. You kind of want enough information, and you want enough information to be able to action, that, to be able to make decisions. More is not better. Yeah. So I think we will need to get to a consensus that will be ultimately related, I believe, related to the use cases, to be able to derive actionable insight from the information that's being requested.
Okay.
I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think that's part of the dialogue around what is this right level of information that we need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's very interesting and might also well align it indeed with the post-quantum cryptography maturity model, where you can say, okay, yes, this is the basis and it's independently verified that the solution actually applies to that or not without actually having to disclose that information. But we're also already running short in time. So just going back to Zig, you started, and I think you already stated from that, is it really, what works better? Incentives, mandates? I think it's something that often comes up. What's your thought on that?
So I've been very open about stating that the single most valuable thing that the national technical authorities can do is to provide clear timelines, because those are what a CIO or a CISO can look at and plan against and take to the board. Now, if we unravel that a little bit, we can look at what's happening in government, and we can see that there's a lot of progress in PQC migration in government. We can look at Jaime and the financial services sector. We can look at Laurie and telecoms and be reasonably confident that those industries are on track to get to the PQC migration by the dates that we sort of understand. If we start to look at the rest of our critical infrastructure, Ollie Whitehouse, who runs NCSC in the UK, talks about a cliff. I'm rather more brutal, and I talk about a gaping void. We do not have action in all of the other critical industries, or indeed the rest of industry, around migrating to PQC. Finance, telco, and government, fine. The others not. That then leads to the question, what is the right way of encouraging that to happen? Being nice doesn't appear to have worked. I think it's time to start talking to government, talking to regulators and saying, this now needs to be part of your national cybersecurity strategy. I mean, the Malaysian announcements this morning were absolutely brilliant, and so thank you for that. But we need to see more countries doing that and saying, this is part of what we expect businesses to do, because we can't afford the disruption to our infrastructure that will happen otherwise.
Okay, well, thank you. Very interesting. We could have about this panel for at least an hour or two, or maybe the rest of the day. But we only have, well, really about 2 minutes left. So before I would want to ask any other questions. Are there any questions from the room? Was anyone a quick question that we can address? Or maybe are there any questions remote? pkic.org/ask. You can always submit your questions, and we will try to address them as soon as we can. Any questions from the room, quickly?
While we're waiting for a question, I will notice that Zig left out healthcare in the critical infrastructure, and it's true.
Okay.
They're a long way from that. And, one of the challenges that we identified is if you think you can do some sort of progress in a sprint, that's going to get very expensive. You actually need to plan for a marathon. And if you plan for a marathon, it'll be less expensive, and you'll have milestones along the way that you'll be able to meet. You'll get progress and buy-in. If you're going to sit back and wait and think you're going to do a sprint, it's your gaping void, like you said.
Okay, so just really quick, we have 1 minute. Beyond NIST has been very prominent in giving guidance and deadlines, and the 2030, 2035, we see a lot of governments following that. What is the one key standard or deadline guiding your sector's PQC strategy? And just who wants to answer?
Yeah, look, I for healthcare, and certainly US-centric, but also look to from globally around the world, it would be HIPAA. And so there is an NPRM, a proposed rule change to security rule that may come in, should be approved potentially Q1 next year, and that'll give entities a year to be compliant. But in that proposed rulemaking for change in security, everybody who is a covered entity or business associate to a covered entity needs to have a migration plan for PQC. And not just them, but the whole supply chain. They have to require the supply chain as well to have one.
Laurie, anything you want to add to that?
Standards and products. So, and this isn't just, obviously we sometimes think, oh, NIST have done the first set of standards, we're set to go. There's a whole bunch of follow-on standards beyond that. And we need that to accelerate, because otherwise we won't get the products that we need. So that is one of the things that will be on the critical path.
Well, sounds good. We're out of time, so we really have to wrap up, because the next sessions are going to be started. And I'm Samantha, what do we have here on stage?
Yeah, we have Jaime coming up next. So I just want to
immediately continuing after this.
joining us again. So yeah, we'll